Hey, how's it going? First, I'd just like to say that I'm super humbled to be here among all these awesome people, and thanks very much to the Do Lectures for the invite, for Forest Farm, and the whole crew here for putting on such a great, unforgettable event. My name is Joel, and I make handmade kitchen knives in a small shop in Brooklyn, New York, for people who love to cook. What I'd like to share today is a little bit of my story, how I came to knife making, and how I think and feel and go about doing what I do. I'd also like to talk a little bit about Brooklyn and the community we've got there, what the future might look like for us and other similar communities of makers that are thriving at the moment. Last year, I was really lucky to have a remarkably talented filmmaker named Keith Ehrlich shoot a short film about my shop and about me. And he did such an awesome job of showing the story of how I came to knife making that I wanted to show a short section of that film right here so that you guys can get a sense of what I do and get this thing kicked off here. All right, so where's this damn? There we go. That's my shop. That was supposed to come first. But here's the video. My name is Joel Bukiewicz. I'm the owner and operator of Cut Brooklyn, a small shop here in Gowanus, Brooklyn, where we make handmade knives for home and professional cooks. I lived in Brooklyn and I went to graduate school at the New School University. I got an MFA in fiction writing. I had a really hard time selling the first manuscript that I wrote. When that sort of went sour and I couldn't sell my book, I just kind of lost steam altogether. I had this period of fear that I was really gonna lose writing. It was this thing that I really loved, and I was afraid that I was just gonna lose it forever. I decided to take a 3-month hiatus from it, just stop altogether. And when I stopped, I found that I developed this need to make these sort of creative offerings on a daily basis, to basically make things. When I recognized this need, I started just making stuff. A set of bookshelves, a set of canoe paddles for my dad, jewelry, tables, various things. Whenever there was an occasion, I would just go, oh, I'll make something for that, or I'll fix this at the house. And that was kind of filling that need for me. At some point, I just sort of had the idea, I'd always kind of had a fascination with knives, that it would be fun to try. So I tried it out, and it just really resonated with me. It just sort of rung in me the idea of making something so basic and simple when I'd been working on projects that were so very abstract that would never see the light of day. And that this thing that I made would be useful, would be inherently useful, and would be around forever, and somebody would find it someday and be like, wow, I can use this thing. So in a creative way, it was very much the opposite of what I was doing. The payoff was just massive, and so I was just hooked. We had this dilapidated garden shed behind our house. When I wasn't making money, cutting wood or doing various jobs, I was in there just pushing, just like hooked. I just got good at it. I found that I had a talent for it, and I got good really fast. So I was selling knives, within 3-4 months of making my first. These were sort of sporting type knives, so hunting knives, these kinds of things. All of a sudden, I was on a year wait like that. People were waiting for my work, and I thought, man, maybe I could do this. And this is one of the things that really appealed to me, was that it didn't cost me a lot to sort of get into this. It just took time. And when I had this break from writing, that's like what I had. So you go into the shop and, you cut yourself, you burn yourself, you fuck stuff up, you ruin something you've worked on for 3 weeks, and you never make that mistake again. So this is how I learned. And so those things are the same with writing and knife making. It just takes, buckets of blood and sweat and fucking work to get there. That's That's it, to get good, to get competent. And then once you become competent, maybe you have it in you to become an artist. Maybe you don't. Thanks. Yeah, Keith Ehrlich is that filmmaker's name, and I'm definitely pretty proud to have been in that. He did such an awesome job. So a big thanks to him and his crew at Made by Hand. I'd like to make one quick point about I guess the last line. It's a great line, that last line in there, but it's not exactly how I feel. It sort of sounds like I'm speaking about a progression, a sort of hierarchy of work that goes from atop which sits art. And I think it's true that inside every great artist there's a craftsman, and it's not necessarily true that inside every great craftsman there's an artist. This is pretty tricky stuff, art versus craft, and I really don't want to get too caught up in it. But I guess I'd just like to point out that truly great world-class artisans are as rare as great artists, and their genius is just as evident in their work, and just as powerful. So I'd love if we were able to get to a place, and I think we're moving there, where craft is appreciated beside art in popular thinking, and we marvel at the craft of a really well-made thing, just as we do at a great piece of art. So, like that. In any case, these issues of identity, craftsman versus artist, and labels are important to me, I think, in part because I know how rich work as a craftsman can be, and I feel a desire to kind of smash these simple notions. And in part because I think the essence of my journey into knife making was about identity, about losing my identity as a writer and sort of earning my place as a knife maker. So at the time, really none of this was in focus for me, but it was all sort of chaos and regret. It was a pretty dark time, and certainly wasn't an easy transition. But I think it's always come down for me, whether I was writing or making knives, to the work, that sort of 3 foot by 3 foot box in which you place yourself every morning and spend your day coaxing things into life and to perfection. To me, that's a sacred space, and I feel like impossible things can happen there, and victories and failures and magic stuff that you just sort of could never conceive of. And I think there's great joy to be found there, and great sustenance in doing whatever it is that you do there, as well as you have it in you to do at any given moment. The maxim under which I work, under which I make my knives, is to make every knife the best knife that I've ever made. That's really it. Marketing plans and logos and packaging and social media, I feel like if the work isn't there, it's all just furniture for a house that doesn't exist. But if the work is great, people will come. I believe that as much as I believe anything, and deeply in my heart. So when I learned to make knives, I was living down in Georgia, down in the deep south in a small town. But my wife, Julie, and I were always coming back to Brooklyn. So act 2 of my story is what we found there. The answer for me, coming back to Brooklyn, moving back to a city is, at least New York, and I think most big cities, is pretty hard. Like, leaving is easy, but coming back is fucking hard. You've got like $300 in security deposit to roll over, and you have to get, a studio and an apartment. You've got like broker's fees and first and last months, and all. It's tough kind of coming back to the city. So for me, the answer was this tiny little studio in a building full of artist studios in Gowanus, Brooklyn. So it's an industrial neighborhood. There's this horribly polluted canal that runs through it. I think it's like the most polluted waterway in the States. But it's also sandwiched between these 2 pretty well-off residential neighborhoods, Park Slope and Cobble Hill. So I found this building that was right underneath the F train tracks, and it was a full floor of studios, artist studios, that I moved into. So there were 20 makers on this floor of studios, and pretty awesome people there. Painters. There was a guy who did Persian calligraphy, and he also made and painted these model airplanes, like the kind of planes that you fly on a string, just sort of around you in a circle. It's like elaborate paintings on these things. Jewelry makers and sculptors of every kind. And for me, this place was a revelation. I realized that I had been on an island down in Georgia, and that the work that I was doing, nobody else was doing it quite that way, that I just decided to do this thing. Just do the work that I love to do, and nobody else was working that way in Georgia. And in the space I was in Brooklyn, everybody was working that way. So I gained some sort of sustenance from being around other people who were making such sacrifices. Time, the health of our relationships, our health, money, everything we had. We were just giving it to this thing, whatever it was that we had fallen in love with. And for me, it was a validation, and it fueled me and kind of dared me to do better. So I think Brooklyn is kind of special, and the maker and producer community that exists there didn't just happen. It didn't just occur. I think it starts with a seed of talented and driven makers lured by a market for their work and affordable living. And Brooklyn's perfect in that regard because we've got Manhattan right in our backyard, or, we're in its backyard, depending on your perspective. But Manhattan's right there, and there's still affordable living. But a bunch of people just doing cool stuff in their studios doesn't really amount to a community. So what it requires to make that happen is the intercedence of a few key sort of facilitators who recognize the possibilities in a sort of budding community like this, and are kind of interested and willing to set the thing alight. So these tend to be people who get around a little bit. So photographers, videographers, bloggers and writers, maybe people who run stores or publicans. And not only do these characters sort of give young makers the exposure that they need to continue, but they also, because they get around the way they do, they have the opportunities to connect makers and facilitate collaboration. And I think it's possibly overstated, but kind of true, that these people are sort of angels and heroes for these communities. And I encourage all of you with the access and the sort of means to kind of wear that hat for a while. I think that you can affect people's lives in ways that you won't even be able to fathom at the time. So I think this is how communities like Brooklyn are built, and that the quality of life that results from living in such a rich community, that more than anything else, that's what keeps a maker at it, and makes the 80-hour weeks and bloody, filthy hands and doubt and failure and scraping for rent and all that worth it, and more than worth it. So Brooklyn's awesome, and it fills many needs, but the truth is, at the end of the day, it's still tough to match a living with handmade work. There's a pretty strong idea out there, and it's been written about a little lately, at least in New York, that the small maker shop is sort of a pipe dream, that someone who does their work slowly and by hand won't hack it past 5 years, and the hours and the sacrifice and huge costs involved in working by hand that you then have to pass on to your customers and the price of what it is you're selling. That is just not sustainable. And that working the way we do, we don't create jobs. We have these, small shops. So that really, to succeed, there's this idea that you have to scale. And that scaling means moving production outside of your community. And really, you're sacrificing, at that point, a whole lot of what makes you special. And you're certainly not creating jobs in your own community. So at my shop, we approach these challenges, which, are definitely real. I don't dismiss them out of hand. They're real and they have merit. And we approach them by staying, I guess, sort of nimble and remaining a work in constant progress, in which we're always assessing our evolving needs and assets, and developing a kind of symbiotic relationship between them. The standard way to do things as a knife maker is to take orders. So people email you, they call you, they say, hey, I'd like this knife and with this kind of handle, and you say, great, and you look at your calendar and you have calculated how many knives you can make a week, and you tack, I can make 6 knives a week, so I'll just tack them on the end of the calendar. So I guess about 2 years ago, around the time I was looking to move into a new space, we hit about 2 years, a little more than 2 years on my backlog, and this sort of feels like one of those problems that it's really good to have, especially in this economic climate. Job security for 2 years, that's awesome. But to know exactly the knife that I would be making 2 years from the day was creatively brutal. It was rough. So, so what happened was I was looking for a new space in Gowanus, and we landed on in a sort of storefront space. Small manufacturing space in Gowanus has gotten kind of expensive. Small makers are snatching it up. So this storefront appeared, and it was not really fit for us, but or it didn't seem like it. But it was more space than I needed for less money, and so we grabbed it. It was the month we got married, my wife and I. So it was like not a good time, but we grabbed it. I grabbed it, and what happened was there's an actual storefront in there. So what I decided to do when we moved in there, a little while after we moved in there, was to lock down my order list. So I don't take orders anymore. Just for the record, I don't take orders anymore. We're open 2 days a week, and for shop hours for periods of time. So Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I make stuff that I want to make, whatever I want to make, knives generally. And we've built this picture frame on the wall. Here I have. Oops. So we built this frame and put some magnets in it, and I'll hang them up there, and people come in and they buy the knives. Well, this was the hope, and it's worked out. So people will come in and purchase the knives, and whatever I don't sell on the day of, I take a picture of it and put it on my website, and people will call me about it. So having this space allowed me to do that, and it's freed me up to work collaboratively with other producers in Brooklyn. It's also allowed me to do things like this. Like, if I had 6 knives to make this week, I wouldn't be here. I'd have been like, no, I can't do that. So that's been great. This space we've got also has allowed us to do knife skills classes. Let's see here. Pieces that I like to make right there. Yeah. So these are the knife skills classes we do. They're small. There's like 8 people in each class. It's pretty intense. They're intensive. It's a 2-hour class or 3-hour class, and it's lots of mechanics, developing some muscle memory, all the classic cuts, and then at the end, my wonderful wife last year turned our refrigerator in the back of the shop into a kegerator. So we're friends with all the several local craft breweries and home brewers. So we break out the good beer and hang out for a good hour or 2 and drink beer after class after the knives are put away. People like to see the shop. Yeah, we've got the shop. So we also we had a pumpkin carving party this past year, so at Halloween, and then this was before Halloween. Halloween proper, we did a costume pig roast. So everybody dressed up in costume, and we roasted a pig and ate it, and it was awesome. I got pretty drunk, and we had a raffle, and I just started giving half the shop away. That was fun. I think that's going to be like a yearly thing, I think. That was a lot of fun. Let's see here. So as far as jobs, one of the things we've been able to do is to spawn a couple small endeavors out of our shop. My assistant a couple years ago, his name's Niels Wessel. He's now opened a small company called Brooklyn Butcher Blocks, where he makes these gorgeous end grain and long grain cutting boards, butcher blocks. My current assistant, Mariah Coles, she makes and sells her own kitchen knives as well. They're absolutely stunning. I think you'll probably be seeing from her, you'll be hearing from her in the future. I'll never have, 50 employees, but maybe someday I'll help to spawn 50 small companies, and I'd be awfully proud of that. I think that my time is up, so I guess I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys at the bar.